What's up, everybody? We are back on another Thursday morning with Bammers, your show about all things Alabama fan culture. I am Matt SCALICI, your host as always, here with my co-host Ben Flanagan, and we're this show here, as well as the podcast of the same name, which I want to make sure that we give a shout out to real quick before we start today, Ben, are brought to you by the Mercedes-Benz Tech Program. And Ben, we just are now underway into a new season. We're a few episodes in now to a new season of the Bammers podcast. Can you kind of give us a little bit of an idea of what's already out there so far from the new season and maybe what to expect?
Yeah, sure. So we're 3 episodes into the newest season. There are going to be 7 episodes. The last episode is going to fall the day of the SEC football championship and also the day that the Alabama basketball team plays Gonzaga. So hopefully a big day for Alabama athletics. Generally, we're hoping that Alabama is playing in that football game. Certainly some work to be done before that happens, but there have been 3 episodes so far. So this season is a little different in that it kind of looks back on the 2020 season, which was obviously magical, one of Alabama's all-time greatest national championship runs, but also the COVID season, right? Like there was the looming cloud of the pandemic that hung over it, and in spite of all the obstacles, Alabama was still able to do their thing and dominate and win in extraordinary fashion. But it looks back at some of the fan perspective, the point of view as it relates to how everybody sort of experienced that amazing season, again, with that looming cloud hanging over it. So what it was like to be inside Bryant-Denny Stadium when there was 20% capacity, which was very unusual, certainly. What it was like, how Alabama impacts Tuscaloosa, the program itself from an economic standpoint, like how much money the program makes, how much money the city of Tuscaloosa could have lost had the season not happen. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars, how that affects businesses like Big Bad Barbecue, Big Bad Wolf's Barbecue, that is so famous for their barbecue nachos, who were not even there at the Houndstooth during the 2020 season, as we know now, not here for the 2021 season. So I spoke to the co-owner of that business to talk about that impact. So again, some of it through the COVID lens, but not all of it. Some of the episodes are about just normal Bammer stuff. Again, the fan experience. The idea of the podcast is to put people inside the hearts and minds of Alabama football and really Alabama sports fans. So we'll have episodes about how people keep up with Alabama football if they're not able to be in Tuscaloosa for any games at all. If they live in different parts of the country, different parts of the world, does not allow them to come and experience games like so many fans are able to this season, especially. So basically how they follow Alabama from afar. I'll have an episode about what it's like to be an Alabama basketball fan, somebody who's just as obsessed with Alabama basketball as they are with Alabama football, and sort of like the lonely part of the sandbox, we'll say, when it comes to that. But that's changing now during the Nate Oates era. And certainly we've had some recruiting news in the past couple of weeks that all signs point to that program on the upswing. So a lot of fun episodes coming up. There's even one about Alabama fans who kind of grow out of Alabama football. They sort of like lose their love for it. Like if that's even possible, especially during the era that we're seeing right now that we talk about so much on this show, the Saban era, which is arguably the greatest in the program's history. So how could somebody just grow out of that or not even care about it? I talked to a couple of people who fall into that category. So a lot of fun stuff on the way for the podcast. So check it out. It's available wherever you get your podcasts. I really believe that Alabama fans, like if you're a college football fan, really, but Alabama fans especially, it's about you. It's about how you see Alabama football and Alabama sports and what the experience is like that so many people don't understand as well as you do. So please check it out. I think it's something that you will really love.
For sure, Ben, and there's a big back catalog of episodes too that are still great to listen to, and this is not the kind of show where I think it's only about what's going on this week. It's definitely stuff that's still relevant to you. So go and check those out wherever you listen to podcasts. And meanwhile, here on the video version of Bammers, Ben, we're here every week on Thursdays. And we want you guys to be a big part of the conversation. We want you to comment, and you'll see your comments popping up here right on the screen with us as we're having our discussion. And our discussion today, it's really already gotten underway from our commenters. They were already leaving. They were already leaving suggestions, Ben, before we went live, because you can do that on YouTube. So our YouTube commenters have been out there being very active so far. But we're going to be talking about the top 5 moments, our top 5 anyway, moments from the Bama-LSU rivalry. And we're sticking to the Saban era. If you have any that you want us to bring up and talk about that predate that, that's certainly fair game, and you guys should throw those out there too. But Ben, this is an interesting rivalry because I think with the Iron Bowl and with Bama Tennessee, there are every generation of Bama fan has memories of huge games in those rivalries, or some reason why that rivalry became really important and heated for them. The Bama-LSU rivalry doesn't really exist as a true rivalry, so to speak, before basically the generation that you and I belong to, Ben, people who are now in their kind of mid to late 30s. I mean, if you go back to before the time that Nick Saban was at LSU, this was kind of just this was a game that I think for Alabama fans felt very similar to a lot of the rest of the SEC West games that they play right now. Things like Ole Miss and Texas A&M, I think. They were important games at times, but it wasn't this rivalry that I think everybody looks forward to for the whole season the way that it has become over the last 15 years.
It became the game in college football.
Yeah.
Like, the stakes couldn't be higher, right? Where national championship implications were there every single year. Like, it determined the landscape of college football, and you felt that weight in the weeks leading up to the game, because often there would be a bye week before it, as there was this week, even though the stakes aren't quite as high, other than Alabama has to win every game for the rest of the season in order for them to be in the playoff, or the SEC championship for that matter. So the stakes aren't quite as high, but we know that LSU is always extremely talented. They're always loaded with NFL talent. And so we know it's going to be a physical game anytime that they play. But just looking back at those games in 2008 and 9 and 11, obviously 20, it's just the atmosphere is electrifying. There's no other way to put it. There's a reason that ESPN College Game Day has broadcast 9 times these teams have played during the Nick Saban era. That is crazy. So they've played 15 times. Nick Saban holds an 11-4 advantage in the series since he's been the Alabama coach, which is pretty amazing when you talk about how fierce this rivalry has been and how big those games have been. The fact that it's been that one-sided, even though the games haven't always been super one-sided, that's pretty amazing. And it's certainly a badge of honor for Alabama and Nick Saban as a head coach, but it's just always been the game, the way that it kind of – and I would even make an argument, Matt, that it sort of supplanted, at least for a little while, the Iron Bowl in terms of Alabama's biggest rival, certainly of the Saban era, in terms of the stakes of the game, how much was on the line each time that they played, and really how sort of like not ugly it got, like between the fan bases and the teams, but just how competitive it got. Like everybody wanted a piece of that game, and the games themselves have mostly delivered in terms of being some of the most entertaining we've ever seen.
I would say for sure that there were definitely years that this game was bigger than the Iron Bowl. I think, that's probably swung back a little bit now. Now that Auburn has beaten Alabama the last 2 times they've gone to Jordan-Hare Stadium, I think that combined with LSU sort of struggling. I mean, despite 2019, I would say still overall it's been a rough 5 years or so for LSU. That they're not a sort of consistent part of the national championship conversation the way that they were. But as you said, Ben, there's been some classics in this series for the last 15 years, and I want to go through some of those. And it's hard for me to order them really. I'm gonna do mine basically in chronological order. That's the best way I could think of to do the ones that I wanted to highlight today. So I'll start with 2008, which honestly, the 2007 one was a pretty good game too, but I'm going to skip ahead to 2008 and bring up this game, which I think really was, at the time, and I think it probably still holds up, this was a game. We talk about the Clemson game from 2008 a lot, and the Georgia game from 2008 as being these big breakthrough moments for Alabama, where people finally started to take them seriously and started to respect them as the program that they would eventually become. But I think they didn't really earn it until they beat LSU in Baton Rouge in overtime in 2008. I think that felt like a very momentous point in time for this program. It had been kind of a monkey on their back for a really long time. Alabama had really been dominated by LSU since basically since the early 2000s, and I think they always knew there were these certain hills they were going to have to get over, and obviously Florida ended up being one of those. But this, winning the West was a really big deal in 2008. You go back and look, man, Alabama had not done it since 1999, and being able to finally go to Baton Rouge and break through and win a game like that with so much on the line, and do it the way they did it too. I mean, it was not an easy win. They had to make a lot of pretty spectacular plays to win that game.
Yeah, that was an amazing game. And if I remember correctly, Alabama had a shot to win the game in regulation with a short field goal that LSU blocked. Was that game, or was that?
It was at the very end of regulation, yeah.
Yeah, and so that was an amazing game, to say the least. You're right. Everything, again, was on the line, and it just continued to cement the fact that Alabama was back, that this was a dynasty in the making. But it took some growing pains, that's for sure. Like, they did not dominate the game. And, like John Parker Wilson was quarterback. He struggled to throw in that game, although I think it's a great performance by him based on some of the other intangibles and other elements that he brought to it, including quarterback sneaks for touchdowns in the game. Glenn Coffey ran the ball for more than 100 yards in it. But the real star of that game, Matt, and this is one of my picks on my top 5 moments, was Rashad Johnson in 2008. The safety who had 3 interceptions in the game, including a 54-yard pick 6 at one point. But then
that's right. I believe that was right before halftime, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember him. That was a tipped ball, I believe, and he caught it out of the air. And at the same time, I think Rolando McClain then absolutely pummeled the intended LSU receiver before Rashad Johnson ran it back 54 yards for a touchdown. But then the third interception, this outstretched grab in the end zone that gave Alabama the opportunity to basically walk it off and win the game, which they did on the next possession. So Rashad Johnson, I mean, the Saban era just has this long list of individual performances, especially in this series. But I think Rashad Johnson belongs on anybody's short list when it comes to like a single game performance, one of the best of the Saban era when you consider the stakes of everything. As a single game performance, Rashad Johnson's 3 interceptions, just absolutely amazing.
For sure, a big standout performance, and you mentioned John Parker Wilson too, who we don't think of as being one of the sort of cream of the crop when it comes to offensive talent in the Saban era. Now that Saban's time at Alabama has become known for putting all these offensive stars in the NFL. But John Parker Wilson had a great game that day, and that was a very good season for him that I think will always kind of go down as underrated. And I would like to have John Parker. He's an old friend of our AL.com crew. I would love to get John Parker on the show and ask him about that game and some other ones. He's got some great stories from his season there. And I think Rashad Johnson might be on the list for us too, Ben, sometime in the future.
That would be awesome. What was that the where he threw up the phone call after he had scored a touchdown? Right. Was that, we'll have to ask him about that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, what was that all about?
So just encouraging our commenters some more. Y'all are bringing some great stuff to the table, and I don't want you to think I'm ignoring you, but some of the games you're mentioning are on the list. So I'll bring your comments up when we get to the games that you guys are talking about. Ben, before we hit our next item on the list here, we have a little bit of and I hate to get us too off track, we have an interesting comment that I wanted to bring up and give our answers to. Jay Griffin here says, Finebaum thinks Bama still has a path with 2 losses, and he wants to know what we think about it. I'm curious, Ben. I'll let you answer first. We did see the playoff rankings come out this week on Tuesday night with Alabama at number 2 right now behind Georgia. There's a lot of people that are very upset about this nationally, but I'm curious what you think in terms of what that signals about Alabama's path forward.
I think it tells me the College Football Playoff Committee doesn't think a whole lot of the rest of college football, just in terms of the resumes that a lot of the teams have put forth, especially when you have Oklahoma, one of the mainstays of the college football playoff, undefeated right now, and they're ranked 8th. I mean, obviously, that means they're also paying attention, right? They're watching the games. They're considering the resumes game by game and performance and comparing them to the other elite teams, so to speak, and they are impressed by Alabama. Alabama's only loss came on a last-second field goal in a hostile environment against a ranked team, and Alabama's got they played a really tough schedule. And so I just think that it would shock me, Matt, if Alabama got in with 2 losses. Like, I understand the path that everybody keeps talking about. Basically, it's going to take a thriller in the SEC championship to get them in with 2 losses. So if they lose to Georgia in an absolute thriller, then maybe they'll consider that. But just in the playoff era, considering what we've seen so far, even though the playoff committee has shown as much love as they have to Alabama in terms of fitting them in when some people thought that they shouldn't be in, if they get in with 2 losses, that would be huge. But just the fact that it's mainly been 1-loss teams or undefeated teams, conference champions, et cetera, tells me that precedent tells me it's going to happen again. But Alabama has made playoff history before, so I say it would shock me, but I guess it shouldn't surprise me if they got in, because we know the playoff committee likes Alabama, as well they should. But I think the the SEC championship game is basically a playoff game for Alabama.
I think you're probably. Yeah, I think I agree with you there, Ben, too. And, look, ultimately, we all want to – I think if you're an Alabama fan, you want Bama to make the playoffs. But I think you if you don't make the playoffs because your second loss was to Georgia in the SEC championship game, I don't know that you can necessarily feel that upset about it, because you wanted your shot, right? You wanted your shot to play your way and control your destiny to win a national championship. That's your shot. I think that's your moment to do it. You're having to go a more difficult road than a lot of the other teams that will end up getting into the playoffs. But hey, that's life. That's the SEC. So I think the one thing we know for sure is that if Alabama gets to the SEC championship game, there's no way to say we didn't get our fair shot at it. We got left out. We didn't get a fair shake. That's your shot. I think you have to play that game assuming that it's for all the marbles and that you have to win it to get into the playoffs. I never want to say never in college football, but I think that it's probably going to be viewed that way. I think the committee is going to say, look, whoever wins that game clearly deserves not only to be in, but to be the 1 seed. And I think whoever wins that game will very obviously be the 1 seed in the playoffs.
Yeah, for sure.
So, good question there from Jay. Thank you we got off track a little bit, but I don't mind doing it for a good question. So, So Ben, we both kind of hit one for 2008 there. I'm gonna move to the next one on the list, which you got to mention 2011. They played twice. There were a number of memorable moments that year. I'm going to specifically go with the moment that LSU crossed the 50 in the national championship game. I think it was kind of a good for one thing, it's very rare that there are moments in college football in a big game that actually make everybody kind of have an inside joke almost. But it really did symbolize kind of the dominance of Alabama in that game, that it was very late in the game before LSU was ever even able to get to Alabama's end of the field. And when they did, the next play was a tackle for loss, and they went right back across to their own side of the 50. So to me, that play will always kind of stand out as the moment that that really sort of illustrated how dominant Alabama was in that game.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. Like, I couldn't believe what I was watching. And that play in particular was just such a reflection of how dominant that defense was. Like, I mean, that was an all-timer defense. If you just go up and down the roster, it's like jaw-dropping who was part of it. But that play in particular, I remember it was late. It was like 6 minutes to go in the fourth quarter, and they had finally crossed midfield, which is just such a just insane thing to even consider, especially how dominant LSU had been that entire season. But I remember looking back on that, and it was 4th and 18, and they were going for it because they had to. And then Dante Hightower, obviously a linebacker with the New England Patriots, as every Alabama fan knows, he just burst through the line, swiped the ball from behind Jordan Jefferson, and oft-forgotten defensive tackle Nick Gentry then fell on the ball right at midfield, and Alabama took over. And that was right before the Trent Richardson when he broke free for his touchdown run just to cinch it. And just amazing, just an emphatic defensive masterpiece that held LSU's offense to just 92 yards, 92 total yards. So that's a really good pick, Matt. I'm going to move on to a more current game, or not current, but a slightly more recent game in 2018. Tua's 44-yard touchdown run in Baton Rouge. And I just look back on this and think about how Tua's Heisman campaign, like, critics often lamented about how Tua never had a true Heisman moment. Like, whatever that means, whatever your definition of that is, like, I don't know if it has to be something that like trends on Twitter or something, or if there's like, King Heisman who says that's the Heisman moment, or if it's something that, we in the media create. But I don't really understand why this 44-yard touchdown run on a bad leg, mind you, wasn't considered his big Heisman moment. Alabama was up 16-0 in the third quarter. He looked downfield for a throw, didn't have anything, scrambled, and finished the drive in one play, basically. He had that bum lower leg that we had mentioned, and he outran an entire LSU defense. And I think that caught everybody by surprise. He was wincing down there. He was grabbing his leg at the end of it. But the fact that he ran for 44 yards against an LSU defense like that for a touchdown was just an amazing moment in his decorated career, one that I think is, especially him losing the Heisman that season, which I think a lot of Alabama fans probably disagree with, despite Kyler Murray's amazing season. Tua was just as worthy. Maybe he should have won, but that moment in particular just highlighted a dominant performance by the entire team. The defense obviously shut out LSU, and I remember going into that game, the stakes were very high then. I think LSU had one loss, and a lot of people said, no matter how dominant Alabama has been this season, this is the game where they will be truly tested. If there's any team that can beat Alabama, it's going to be LSU under the lights in Death Valley, and they just got smoked. And it's because of Tua's greatness and obviously the defense and the rest of the offense that put in just an incredible performance.
And we'll get to him. I mean, he's been in the news a little bit this week, but to me also that 2018 game, one of the things I'll remember about it, because you're right, Ben, the hype leading up to that game was unreal. And there's a video that was captured by our coworker Michael Casagrande pre-game of Ed Orgeron stomping his way through campus on his way to Tiger Stadium in that game. He's out of his mind. He looks like a wrestler coming down the ramp, making his entrance. And I mean, he was he's clenching his fists. He's shouting at everybody. The hype machine for that game was really through the roof. And I think maybe part of the reason why it didn't end up being considered the quote unquote Heisman moment for Tua is I think Alabama beat LSU so thoroughly in that game that they kind of fell off the map, and people almost were dismissive of LSU in part because of how badly they got beaten in that game.
Yeah. I mean, what you just described, though, is him like a pro wrestler, like walking down there. That's just like every day. That's like going to the grocery store.
It was pretty normal, yeah.
For Coach O, going to the grocery store or the post office is like, that's like a pro wrestler stomping down. I don't know. Maybe like if things don't work out, I know we'll talk about it a little later, but if things don't work out in football, I mean, why doesn't the guy go into pro wrestling? I'm sure there's a home for him there.
I think it's pretty clear at this point that the guy was not ultimately a successful head coach at this level anyway. It didn't work out for him at Ole Miss. It hasn't worked at LSU beyond the incredible microcosm of 2019. But Ed Orgeron can get some energy going. He can get some enthusiasm up. And he actually was apologizing this week for doing it after that 2019 Bama-LSU game. He sort of sounds like he wants to make sure that everybody knows that it was not to get too far into the wrestling terminology, Ben, but Ed O's kind of like telling everybody, hey, look, it wasn't real. It was just a work in 2019 after that game. I was just getting my guys hyped up. Nobody else was supposed to hear that.
Look, Matt, I mean, to Alabama fans, life is a work. So I would just say that you said it, they heard it, and you got caught saying it because somebody was recording it. So, I mean, I considered that as my number 3 moment of the Alabama-LSU rivalry during the Saban era. Coach O's apology this week for his locker room talk. But look, man, they were hyped up. They had just won. They were on their way to a national championship. It's normal to be hyped up, but look, it was 2020 or 2019. People record this stuff and put it out there. So y'all always have to be aware that, whatever you say could end up online. And that's what happened. And look where we are now. But I don't know. I still think pro wrestling for him. He might be a little green in the squared circle in terms of moveset, Matt, but he's got the look and probably pretty good on the mic considering what the standards are for pro wrestling. So
and a good comment here says his best football performance was in the movie The Blind Side.
Woo! I don't know. I think people should go back and watch that one. I think the lights on set were making Coach O sweat a little bit, but he pulled through. He said his lines. And he had to get back into character as the head coach of Ole Miss for that. Don't forget. So that was a major transformation that he underwent for that role.
Good stuff. All right, so I'm going back to my chronological order here, and I'm going to 2012, which to me will always stick out as a very memorable game. Probably for that entire season. I think the 2012 Bama team was very dominant overall, and those teams tend to not have as many big memorable moments that stick out. I think the SEC championship game is one that people remember a lot. I think obviously they remember the loss to Texas A&M that year, but that game against LSU, it almost all came unraveled in that game. It was very close to being over with for that team in Baton Rouge that night, and LSU scored a late touchdown to go up, and I was in the building for that game. I think you were there too, Ben, right?
Yep.
It was, I've had plenty of experiences with lively crowds covering SEC football over the years. That's about as loud as I've ever heard a stadium was LSU's go-ahead touchdown late in that game, and it really felt like Alabama was not going to be able to recover from that. It really seemed like it was over for them. And, the ability of that team to engineer a late drive from A.J. McCarron, hitting some receivers that honestly, they're not really hailed up there as the guys that you look at on all these, Pro Bowl rosters today from that came from Alabama, but a good, solid group of receivers. It wasn't a team that was built to air it out and to run a 2-minute offense and not run any time off the clock. But they worked their way down the field. And then one of the most audacious pre-Lane Kiffin play calls, I think, for an Alabama offense, a screen pass to T.J. Yeldon that he broke open and scored. And it went from being the loudest stadium that I've potentially ever heard to dead silence except for a tiny pocket in the corner of Bama fans and the Alabama sideline which was just going absolutely nuts. It was, I mean, that I think will stick out to me as one of those sort of killer road moments for Alabama in the Saban era. To hear the opposing crowd feeling like this is a big moment for us, that we finally did it. We knocked these guys off, and then to see it all just deflate instantly like that. That's what those are the kinds of things I think Alabama has become known for during this era.
It's number one for me, Matt. Like, it to me is the best moment from the Alabama perspective, certainly, of this era in terms of this rivalry. I mean, it doesn't get any better for me. Like, A.J. McCarron going full John Elway for the final minute and a half with 0 timeouts, I believe, too. Hitting Kevin Norwood for 3 straight first downs. And then obviously 2nd and 10 LSU blitzes, and McCarron finds TJ Yeldon for that screen pass, and TJ Yeldon does the rest. I mean, just amazing individual performance by him to juke the Tiger defense out of their shoes. It was an improbable moment, improbable touchdown. And like you said, just sent a hush over the roaring Tiger Stadium. I'm with you, man. Like, I had heard all the hype about Tiger Stadium leading up to that, and for me, it totally lived up to it. Like, it was just one of the most amazing college football atmospheres I've ever been in. It was a night game, obviously, which is something they boast about all the time. It was true. I sat in this LSU student section, Matt. Like, I found tickets outside the stadium, and I didn't know where they were going to be. I didn't know that stadium from a hole in the ground in terms of the seating. And sure enough, I end up in the LSU student section. So I just, it was a whole other subplot to the game in terms of, like, keeping a low profile, right? As I'm watching this among this herd of Tiger fans, it was just insane. It was insane. The drive overwhelmed everybody in the building. I mean, it left A.J. McCarron in tears, like on the sideline. Like, he was like huffing and puffing over there, almost looking like he was having a panic attack in terms of how big that moment was, especially keeping the season alive. That was the week before the Texas A&M game, I think, that they lost. And so
I believe that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we all know what happened. They went on to win the national championship, just absolutely beat down most of the rest of their schedule, including Notre Dame in the national championship game. But yeah, man, that to me, it just doesn't get any better if you're an Alabama fan. I always talk about how I hate close games. Boring games are the best. I much prefer those. I would rather not have that level of anxiety during watching an Alabama game, but it hit an all-time high at that point. But when the anxiety is that high during a close game like that, the wash of relief and joy and just like just pure joy, it just washes all that anxiety away, and you just get to just experience something you'll never forget.
Yeah, definitely one way up there for me. So Ben, that one was on your list. Do you want to do one next, or
Yeah, I think I skipped a pick. So
yeah, go ahead.
I'm gonna go back to 2007, Saban's first season, actually. And I bet a lot of people don't remember this just because of how much has happened since then. And Alabama lost this game. And I tried not to pick a moment from an Alabama loss, and certainly not a moment from the LSU side of it, because you could pick some. I mean, LSU obviously had some amazing moments too. I mean, going back to that 2011 regular season game, the game of the century, when Eric Reed stole the ball from Michael Williams on the way down after Marquise Mays threw a deep pass on that trick play. Les Miles going for it with the trick play, kind of like a reverse play to clinch the 2010 game that basically knocked Alabama out for the rest of the season. There are a lot of great LSU plays, but I am going to go with an LSU win here, but it's from the Alabama perspective. And it's Javier Arenas' punt return during that game when he, obviously everybody knows Javier Arenas, just an amazing player for Nick Saban, defensive back, a return specialist, one of the best return specialists I think we've ever seen, maybe the best that Alabama has ever had with respect to David Palmer, with respect to even Jalen Waddle. Javier Arenas was special. And he had this punt return where he split the coverage for this just insane 61-yard go-ahead touchdown halfway through the third quarter. It looked like Alabama was going to win the game. And Alabama had a lot of momentum going into it. I think that game certainly set the tone for the rest of the rivalry during the Saban era. And, Alabama lost that game. I think they were like 6-2 going into it, and LSU was either undefeated or had one loss. So stakes were amazingly high. And after Alabama lost the game, they obviously went on to lose many more, including the Louisiana Monroe game, and the season kind of unraveled until the bowl game. But LSU ended up winning. I think Glenn Dorsey or another defensive lineman had a strip sack of John Parker Wilson late in the game. They would score shortly after that. But just an absolutely insane moment, and speaks to like what Arenas was capable of, especially with the game on the line, to give Alabama the lead that late. And Alabama was kind of overachieving at that point, or early to midway through that season, where they just seemed ahead of schedule when it came to getting back on the right track and playing at a national championship level. So that's one of my picks. It's something, again, I'll never forget.
Definitely a big – I think there were a couple of moments before Alabama really broke through where it's almost like they glimpsed what it was going to feel like when it finally happened. And I think in some ways that even though it didn't work out their way, it kind of energized the program a little bit. I would say that 2005 Florida game was kind of one of those two. Yeah, you're right. The 2007 LSU game, there was this little moment where Alabama fans said, we're not that far away from being able to win the West. And that was a huge deal when you think about really the year before, they just weren't even in the conversation. I mean, it wasn't even a thought people would entertain that Alabama was going to beat LSU in that game. So it was a sign of progress, even though they had to take another step back, I think, before they could take a step forward. I'll take us from an almost comeback that they didn't pull off to, I would say, maybe one of the best comeback wins of Nick Saban's time at Alabama, which is the 2014 LSU game, where Alabama had fallen behind, not just fallen behind, but then fumbled near their own goal line. And, it was a pretty devastating moment. It really did seem like that game could not possibly go Alabama's way at that point. They had just lost the ball and were basically facing a situation where it seemed like LSU was a sure thing to take the lead, and there wasn't a lot of time left in the game. They hold LSU to a field goal, and then Blake Sims comes out and proceeds to engineer one of the great drives in Alabama football history, I would say, with so much on the line. And Blake Sims, it was a little bit of an echo of that 2012 drive, except Blake Sims was able to do a little bit more on his own than A.J. McCarron could because he had that great mobility. But I think that was a real moment for Alabama as a program, showing how different they could become offensively when they needed to. And Lane Kiffin was early in his time at Alabama at that point, but the way he called that final drive to get Alabama tied back up and take things to overtime was, I think, a transformative moment for the program. And then really the way that they called overtime as well, they came right out of the gate with a trick play and managed to score on that drive and then get a stop against LSU. It was probably as close to losing that I can think of that Alabama has come and still won the game.
That trick play you're talking about was a pass to Brandon Green, who is basically an offensive lineman disguised as a tight end. And I want to give LSU credit. I don't know how he didn't get into the end zone on that play. It took like 3 LSU defenders to kind of like stop him at the 1 yard line from barreling into the end zone. It was an amazing play call, very gutsy. He made the catch, nearly got into the end zone. But I think there was a moment in that game, Matt, where a couple of Alabama fans were caught on camera and you could read their lips. And I think that one of the guys is talking to his buddy and he goes, 54 seconds and no timeouts? I don't know, man. Something like that. And I felt the exact same way. It took the words right out of my mouth. Sims got 54 seconds, no timeouts to work with. And I think they squib kicked it to Alabama out of bounds. And so they gave Blake Sims some decent field position to start with. And like you mentioned, Lane Kiffin just called an amazing drive there. But Sims, the way he executed it, obviously with O.J. Howard, Christian Jones, put Adam Griffith in a position to kick a 27-yarder to go into overtime. And I'm sure Alabama fans were holding their breath about that too, just considering the history with kicking during the Saban era. But, man, that was just amazing. And then the cherry on top to that, other than the win itself, was one of Alabama fans' favorite moments ever, was when Alabama kicked the ball off back to LSU, and Reuben Foster just obliterated Leonard Fournette on the next kickoff. So an amazing moment, to say the least.
For sure, yeah. A-Rat bringing that up, the Reuben Foster hit, but also says right after the Brandon Green trick play, he brings up there was a penalty that backed them up, which Lane Kiffin actually brought up a couple of years ago and said how frustrated he was about that. He was sort of joking about it. I think it was actually like an unnecessary roughness type thing. I want to say it was basically one of the other offensive linemen sort of threw a dumb block after the play was over. So it was a fairly significant penalty, but I think still that play ended up being this kind of deflating gut punch to LSU. When you get a trick play pulled out on you like that and it works that well, you start to get big eyes and you start to sweat and say, they got us, man. They know exactly how to take advantage of us, and we're not going to be able to stop them. I think you could feel LSU kind of having that oh no set in. And you think about 2014, it's the next visit after that 2012 game in Baton Rouge, which was the next visit. I think what was the next game after the 2011 where they beat Alabama and then lose to them in the national championship game. I do think. I mean, we're all talking about this from the Alabama perspective, but I think this game has become a little bit of a complex for LSU fans over the years. I think that they really feel like they would have accomplished so much more in the last decade if it weren't for Alabama. And I think they get themselves hyped up for this game and they get their hearts broken so many times. I think it's a little bit different because there's a lot of other SEC teams that go into the game going, we got nothing to lose. If we beat Alabama, it's one of the best moments in our program's history. If we lose, okay, we thought we were going to lose anyway. LSU still kind of manages to convince themselves that they're going to win these games.
Do you think that's why they acted like they had their first beer after they beat Alabama in 2019? It was unbelievable, man, including Orgeron.
It was huge for them.
It was huge.
I don't think you can be considered a legitimate LSU head coach right now until you beat Alabama. You're just the guy who came after Saban until you can beat him at LSU. It's a very big hang up for them in a way that it isn't for any other program, even Auburn. I mean, as important as that game is to them, I just think it sticks differently in LSU's craw a little bit.
Look, to beat Alabama or to win a national championship, you're going to have to beat Alabama, right?
Right.
And
sure.
The same is true for Alabama, though. To win the national championship, they had to go through LSU all those times, right? In those big games. So it's true. It's a level playing field. And so didn't that snap like a 7 or 8 game winning streak for Alabama in 2019?
I want to say, yeah. So
I guess I would have been excited too, but golly, man.
Yeah, Alabama had won 8 in a row before the 2019 game. So they're trying to start a new streak here this year.
Speaking of that game, real quick before I make one more pick, Matt.
Yeah.
I think Lane Kiffin told that story on Finebaum or some show where he said you could hear his whistle. He whistled for Blake Sims' attention late in the game, and there's a moment where you can see Sims' head snap back, and I think ESPN found the clip, and sure enough, you can hear that loud Lane Kiffin whistle, which he says he uses to his advantage all the time. So the fact that the cameras could catch that noise, absolutely amazing. But
I am always jealous of the guys who can do the super loud whistle. I've never been able to do that. So
I can do the fingers in,
can
but
you?
I can't do the no fingers. That is like a special That's like I think coaches are born with that.
It is really a weapon. It's a tool that if you've got it in a loud football stadium where you're having to go across a big distance, that is a real advantage. He's right.
Let me see if I can get it here, Matt.
It's pretty good.
Pretty good? Yeah, pretty good. I coached a season of church basketball, Matt. That's why I got it down. I wanted to have the Phil Jackson whistle.
It's a big coach whistle, yeah.
Yeah. Matt, my last pick is from 2009. It was another great game, and it's a game that propelled Alabama to their national championship run in the end. And it's when the moment, though, specifically was Julio Jones's 73-yard screen pass catch and run for a touchdown. Just an amazing game. I think Alabama won like 23-14, 24-13, something like that. But Mark Ingram, I mean, that was his Heisman season. He had 144 yards rushing in that game. So another amazing performance by the eventual Heisman winner, but he did not score a touchdown in the game. And Alabama couldn't score a touchdown in the game until Greg McElroy found Julio Jones on that screen pass to the left, where Julio Jones, touted as one of the greatest recruits in history. We know that he's been one of the greatest receivers in NFL history. He lived up to that hype in that moment. He caught a couple of blocks from offensive linemen on the outside, and then the guy just sprinted down the sideline, gave Alabama the lead that they would not give up for the rest of the game, helped Alabama complete their undefeated season, win their first national title since 1992. And I think that that's probably Julio Jones, what you could probably pencil in as his signature moment in an Alabama uniform, because Julio Jones, it's like, why would you go to Alabama that all they do is run the ball, right? And Julio Jones obviously created a different level of standard for wide receivers at Alabama, and Alabama has become wide receiver U in the eyes of so many people. But Julio Jones didn't have to catch a lot of passes to make his mark as one of the great Alabama players of all time, certainly of the Saban era. He blocked. He did whatever he had to do to win. He was just a competitive guy. But when he finally had the ball in his hands, we could see what he could do and what maybe he would do at the next level in the NFL. Man, what an amazing player and what an amazing moment for him. Again, what I think is his signature moment as an Alabama player.
Yeah, that touchdown, Ben, came in the fourth quarter, fairly early in the fourth quarter, and as you mentioned, 73-yard touchdown. Greg McElroy has talked to us before at AL.com for different projects about kind of how his season was going in 2009, and he was really viewed, he felt, for most of that season as kind of the weak point of the team. And he really felt like, especially after the South Carolina game, where Mark Ingram had to sort of come in and take over the game and single-handedly win it for Alabama almost, McElroy was feeling like, I'm a liability to the team. I'm not doing enough offensively. And they come into this game, and I think this was a big moment for him as a player to show that he could win a game for Alabama. Now you mentioned, I mean, Mark Ingram had a more than solid effort in this game, but McElroy comes out and has a rough first half in this game, and then scores, a touchdown in the third quarter, takes a safety in the third quarter. So again, like exposing himself as a possible vulnerability in this game, but then comes back out and answers with that really key moment where they had to execute that play perfectly. And then what I remember right after that, Ben, is that Trent Richardson, for whatever reason, the way that the score had lined up in this game, Alabama decided to go for two after that touchdown. And they line up to run it with Trent Richardson. They mow down LSU and get in and get the 2-point conversion. And the image that I remember from that game is like almost every single LSU lineman went down injured after that play. There's a photo out there somewhere where it's literally right after Richardson has run into the end zone, and there are like 4 LSU players like face down in the turf, basically awaiting for the medical staff to come out and check on them. I don't think any of them were seriously hurt. I think it was sort of this moment where it had been such a struggle for the whole game, and they thought they maybe had a shot at it. and that Julio Jones play followed by a Trent Richardson, rush for 2 points it just sort of broke their back all of a sudden.
Yeah, the physicality of those games is just off the charts. And I mean, it speaks again to the level of talent, and it speaks to the level of like competitive spirit between those two teams. They all wanted that game, because if they won that game, it meant bigger and better things for each of the teams. And Matt, if that's it for our list, I do have a couple of honorable mentions.
I've got one more for sure that I wanted to bring up, and this was one that for me I think feels very important. A lot of these games had very big consequences when they happened, but a lot of times it's for winning the SEC West or getting to a national championship. This one was a little bit different because it was sort of, there was a game within a game happening, and I'm going with the 2015 game where the game was being billed as Leonard Fournette's Heisman campaign was going to have to go through Alabama, and there was a lot of watch out for Leonard Fournette. This could be his Heisman moment if he can have a great game against Alabama. And it not only went so wrong for Leonard Fournette in this game, who finished with about 30 yards total in this game, but Derrick Henry ends up having such a good game that it basically vaults him into the conversation as the Heisman frontrunner. He rushed for 210 yards in this game and 3 touchdowns. I mean, against a team that there was nothing wrong with this LSU team. They were the number 2 team in the country coming into this game. They were a very good football team, and Derrick Henry, honestly, I think we've seen some guys really develop into great players that were just pretty good at Alabama. Derrick Henry kind of came out of the box that way. Like the guy that you watch out there today in the NFL, that's pretty much who he was at Alabama too. He was completely all pro level running back that just happened to be on a college team. 38 carries in that game, Ben. I mean, he was
more too.
Just a monstrous effort, and LSU couldn't stop him. And to me, that was an interesting game that will always stick out to me, because it's look, as much as we all talk about national championships as being the more important thing, and they should be, Heisman trophies matter, and they're important to the fan base and to the program. And that was as close as you'll ever find to a single game where a player won a Heisman Trophy, basically,
and took it from somebody else in the process. Yeah. Right, you're right. Leonard Fournette did not enjoy playing Alabama. It did not
have a good run.
Did not go well for Leonard Fournette. No, that was an amazing game. A few back-breaking runs from Derrick Henry. You're right. I mean, the guy just arrived and was just a freak of nature. There's a guy on Twitter. I think maybe a few people do this. I see the tweet reshared sometimes where they're like, sometimes I just look at Derrick Henry's high school stats and I just stare into the screen until I go unconscious or something like that. And it's just like, so we should have known.
I believe he had 11,000 yards in high school.
Yeah, we should have known. And it sucks that he got hurt last week, hurt his foot. And hopefully with the Titans competing for playoff contention, hopefully if they can get there, maybe Derrick Henry can come back, but certainly wish him a full recovery, because there's just nobody that's more fun to watch, especially if you're an Alabama fan, than Derrick Henry, who once again was dominating the NFL at the running back position anyway. I mean, it was Derrick Henry and everybody else before he went down. So hopefully he comes back, but God knows we have a lot to cherish in terms of Derrick Henry's contributions in Tuscaloosa.
Well, a fun topic today, Ben. I know you said you had some honorable mentions you wanted to throw out there before we wrap up.
Yeah, just a few. Kevin Norwood is kind of like an unsung hero generally, but the unsung hero of just the LSU series, and that dates all the way back to the 2011 BCS game, the rematch, when Kevin Norwood just, I don't want to say dominated, but I mean, like, he really outshined the Honey Badger, right, with a couple of catches above Tyrann Mathieu, who was an amazing player, Heisman contender unto himself. just an amazing individual effort by Kevin Norwood. You mentioned the Blake Sims overtime throw to DeAndre White in 2014. I also have O.J. Howard's 52-yard catch and run touchdown in 2013, a game that Alabama ended up dominating, even though it was fairly close in the first half. That catch and run kind of sealed the deal. So those are some more amazing plays between these two teams. Just a fantastic series, fantastic mashup for the most part each year. Again, even though Alabama, it's kind of one-sided in their favor, 11-4, I think Saban is as the Alabama coach against LSU, his former team. So it's just a storied rivalry, and it will just, as long as Saban is here and maybe forever, it'll just continue to just add chapter after chapter of just amazing memories.
For sure, a very fun series. We'll see what this weekend has in store. Alabama is a heavy favorite in this game, expected to win easily. We know better than to totally discount an opponent this season for Alabama. We saw what happened the last time we did that. So we'll see. Alabama still has to get it done, and they have to. I think they're coming off of a bye week that was much needed, but they've got a tough stretch here to try and make this a special season, and it has to start this weekend. So we will see, and we will be back with you guys next week to discuss whatever it is that happens, and hopefully have some other fun conversations with you guys. I'll bring up one more time. Go and check out the Bammers podcast, which you can find on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, that Ben here produces. Just some extremely well-made podcasting, great storytelling, great explorations of topics that you guys would all be super interested in. Go check it out. And thanks again to our sponsor over at the Mercedes-Benz Tech Program. So for Ben Flanagan, I am Matt SCALICI, and thanks again to all of you for joining us today and contributing to the show here on Bammers. We will see you guys next time.
This show is presented by the Mercedes-Benz Tech Program. To learn more about Mercedes-Benz's world of advanced automotive technology, text the word Mercedes to 55678 or visit www.learnmercedes.com.